Last thing I want to talk about with respect to internationalization in Chapter 8 is the trade-off between customization and standardization. You can kind of think of this as analogous to differentiation and low cost in the generic strategies. Customization is more differentiation, standardization is more low cost. Standardization means that you mass produce a single product and sell that globally. Customization means that you customize products for a given country. So they're opposites, right? And it may not even be even more specific than a given country. It may be given uh, geographic parts of each country, although countries tend to be homogenous enough where you can make country level decisions. But these are due to differences in buyer tastes and preferences for your products and services. So we've got two kind of competing things to do. Now, in an ideal world, right, if you're an organization that has world-class capabilities at creating, a given widget, whatever it is, let's say you're Apple, and you're great at creating user-friendly, high-tech devices, right? You prefer that you can sell the same type product every single place around the world, that you don't have to spend money researching the market, altering the product. It takes away from economies of scale. You have to switch things on the assembly line, maybe have multiple factories. If you can just sell the same product everywhere and not have to customize it, you prefer that. But as we kind of learned about differences around the world, that's not the world that we live in. And so some companies take a customization approach, whereas they really try to learn the fine points of the economy that they're in and tailor products to that and get a competitive advantage in countries around the world that way. In terms of this trade-off, there are two main kind of things, needs or benefits that you're trying to get, right? You want benefits from being globally integrated and standardizing, but you also want to capture profit margins by being locally responsive, right? So if you're locally responsive, you could conceivably raise your price up, right? And because customers see you as a, differentiated from maybe your competitor who's not as locally responsive, who's more, standardized throughout the world. So there are three main strategies, three main approaches to this. The global strategy is all about standardization, right? And getting those benefits of basically being this global company and thinking of basically the globe as one entity, and you want to sell your product everywhere. All right. On the other extreme, down here in this green circle, is the multi-domestic strategy. And the name is a little bit of a clue. Multi-domestic means that you have a strategy for each domestic country, right? So multiple strategies for each country. That's why it's multi-domestic. Whereas global sees everything as one, multi-domestic sees things as many, right? As many as there are markets that you're in. All right. And then one that kind of tries to have it both ways, that's kind of like best cost provider, if you will, is the transnational strategy. And actually, this is the way that many of the successful companies around the world have moved in the 21st century. They think globally. They want to capture as many economies of scale and leverage their capabilities over as many places as they can globally. But in a lot of ways, they still act locally. And so we're going to talk about a little bit more about what that means. But kind of for now, just know that they're trying to have it both ways. And contrary to what you might think, you can be very successful. You're not really, even though there's two forces pulling on your company in two different ways, there are kind of some ways to have your cake and eat it too for a transnational strategy. What it takes, though, is a lot of, it takes good management, and it takes a lot of careful thought, analysis. It takes skilled management. And so that's the transnational strategy. So the first one we're going to look at is the multi-domestic. I know I introduced global first, but we're going to talk about multi-domestic first. Um, it can meet the specific needs of each market more precisely, can respond more swiftly whenever localized demand changes because you've got marketing people, salespeople with their fingers on the pulse, right? You can target reactions to the moves of local rivals much better, right? When you're doing it on a country by country basis, when you're making those competitive moves on a country by country basis. And you can respond more, you're more flexible, right? You can respond more quickly to local opportunities and threats. Things don't have to be cleared through a global headquarters. Managers, country level managers, are given authority to act and make the best marketing decisions, distributions decisions, manufacturing decisions based on what's going on in the local domesticity that they're in charge of. In terms of disadvantages, it tends to hinder resources and capability sharing or cross-market transfers. You know, if I'm making totally different food products for India as I'm making almost anywhere else around the world, there's not a whole lot of sharing. There's not a lot of economies of scope that can occur there. You do tend to have higher production and distribution costs. Even though, you know, global distribution may be expensive, if you've got everything organized under one whole and don't have to kind of artificially do it country by country, that's going to increase your distribution cost if you're doing it country by country. If you're producing things just for the country and you're making products that are tailored to that country, then, you know, same thing. There tend to be higher costs. And so it's not conducive to a worldwide competitive advantage. It's hard to be world class when you're trying to be all things to all people rather than just having this, you know, setting this very high level of performance and, you know, hitting that all around the world. Okay, in terms of a global strategy and, you know, customization, global strategy has a few advantages. First of all, by leveraging the same resources to economies around the world, to markets around the world, you lower your costs. You get economies of scale. You get economies of scope that you might not get if you're acting on a country by country basis. It can also lead to greater efficiencies due to the ability to transfer best practices across markets. In a multi-domestic strategy, a lot of times best practices aren't applicable to a different market. But if everybody's doing similar things around the world and you learn how to do something in China, you can transfer that best practice maybe back to the United States or to Thailand or to India or anywhere. And so that leads to, you know, efficiencies. Third, you can increase innovation and knowledge sharing and capability transfer. Again, if you're doing similar things, you can transfer what you're doing. A lot of times that's done by, you know, sending people abroad. Like, you know, somebody learns to do this in the United States, that knowledge is embodied and that know-how is embodied in them. And you want to bring the same knowledge to, let's say, the United Kingdom. You transfer that person across the pond to do it over there, right? And so that's one way of doing knowledge sharing. You have fewer opportunities for that under a multi-domestic strategy. And then finally, it offers the benefit of a global brand and reputation. So think Toyota, think BMW, think Apple, think McDonald's, think Coca-Cola. You've got these household brands that people know about, and your brand has power, and you can leverage that around the world under a global strategy. Disadvantages are you're much less precise about meeting local needs. One thing I will say about this, I probably should have said it sooner, is that the type of product really matters. There are certain categories of products, especially like stuff that businesses use, right? Productive machinery, that kind of thing. And it doesn't really matter about, you know, being able to meet local needs precisely. Everybody kind of has the same needs. And then even within consumer purchases, things like vehicles have less of a need to be customized than things in food, right? So food that's sold in the grocery store, restaurants, etc. People have very precise demand for what their taste buds say that they want, right? And it's very different around the world, and so it doesn't work with food as well as it does with other categories of product. Um, you're less responsive to changes in local market conditions, right? You've got this one global strategy, and if a market kind of falls offline because of a change there, you either just say, hey, I have to absorb that loss, or you may adjust your entire strategy for the whole world based on you think the rest of the world's going to kind of follow suit. But the whole idea of a global strategy is that we don't tailor a strategy to that particular location. That's more transnational. And then it involves higher transportation costs and tariffs, potentially. A lot of times you might be shipping products around the world, shipping products over borders. If tariffs are a concern, yeah, the global strategy would be kind of a negative there. And there are more central coordination and integration costs, although you'll see that the final strategy we have, the transnational strategy, even has higher coordination and integration costs because the complexity amps up. Okay, finally, the transnational strategy. This is where you attempt to have the best of both worlds. Basically, what the transnational strategy acknowledges is that there are a lot of benefits to a global strategy in terms of economies of scale, in terms of like leveraging brand, in terms of sharing capabilities, etc. And we want to take advantage of all of those things, but we can't always because countries differ. So what transnational strategy says is that on a case-by-case basis, we are willing and prepared to act locally, even though our overall mindset is global. And so the way that pans out is that there may be different functions, some functions that are very global in nature. So it may be manufacturing that's global in nature. It may be your distribution system that's global in nature. It may be your computer, your information systems technology that's global in nature. And then other aspects of the company, maybe the advertising or perhaps sales and how you meet the customer is very localized. And it varies company by company and in terms of the challenges that they encounter. The other thing that transnational acknowledges is that we can share, but we may not be able to share throughout the organization. We may be able to share in some parts of the organization, and we can even gain knowledge in particular places in the world that you might not be able to gain elsewhere, but that knowledge is universally applicable. So I'll give you an example, and I think it's Procter and Gamble. Procter and Gamble usually sells fairly low cost household products, but they also own some brands that are higher end. So they have some like skincare creams that primarily marketed to women around the world, and they had a location in Japan. And basically they developed this skincare regimen with multiple products because turns out that the women in Japan were more discriminating. They were much more particular about what it is that they used than women in other parts of the world. But what they were able to develop by working with that market was a product that was going to appeal to like I guess high-end, very discriminating customers around the world, right? So they leveraged knowledge that they got in Japan around the world. And so it was transnational. They weren't trying to do the exact same thing everywhere, right? They had a Japan strategy, but that localized Japan strategy could then be leveraged as much as possible. And so that's what a transnational strategy tries to do. They want to make things as global as possible realizing that a lot of times you have to act local. So in terms of advantages and disadvantages, this slide doesn't say a ton that you can't really just kind of infer from what we've already talked about, but it offers the benefits of both local responsiveness and global integration. You do get to transfer and share resources and capabilities, like I just mentioned with the skincare example. And it provides the benefits of flexible coordination, and that's what I've been trying to describe as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but we also don't have to push everything down to the country level. We make things as global as possible, and we push down what we need to. It does tend to be very complex and hard to implement. Communication between the corporate headquarters and the different country locations, as well as between the different country locations, is very important. A lot of times it does entail conflicting goals, right? So with a global strategy, everything is subsumed under the corporate goals. With a multi-domestic strategy, there's not these conflicts because everything's decided at the country level. But now we're trying to make goals that are, we've got standardization goals, we've got customization goals, and sometimes they're going to butt up against each other, and we've got to make decisions. And the people that lose, right, are a lot of times going to be unhappy with how things went, right? And so you could conceive of a scenario where there's people in two geographic locations that have very different ideas. One wants a globalization strategic decision to occur. One says, no, hey, no, we've got to meet the needs of these local individuals. Somebody's going to leave that debate, that conflict, unhappy. All right. And for those reasons, it a lot of times involves more costly and time-consuming implementation. And so there's a lot on management in a transnational strategy. Okay, and believe it or not, here is a somewhat simplified example of a transnational network structure from entertainment and technology company NV Philips, based in Europe. I believe the Netherlands, which is why you see Holland, they call it Holland there, as the largest or one as the main nexus there. But you can kind of see the different country locations and who works with who, right? Who is coordinating closely with who? Everybody's obviously coordinating fairly closely with Holland, although you see maybe a few that don't have direct lines to home headquarters. But actually, this is even simpler than a lot of transnational network structures that you'll see in terms of the lines of communication between the different organizations. All of this has to be coordinated somewhere, and in a lot of cases, that is, there's one location where it coordinates. But some companies will coordinate different functions in different locations around the world, right? And so you may have marketing in one country and production and distribution based in another country, etc. So transnational network structures are very complex and they require a lot of mapping, a lot of understanding, a lot of good communication, and a lot of times what the managers in the home headquarters are doing is facilitating relationships, facilitating communication, etc. And so that just gives you a taste of how a transnational network structure works.